see when it comes on. If you can already see and hear me then, thank you very much for your patience and for coming over, dealing with the technical difficulties. But it looks like we have everything up and working now, which is great. A little bit of echo there. Okay, we are live. So thank you everyone for your patience while we sorted out the technical difficulties and shifted things over here to YouTube. Just going to do a short introduction again before we get into the questions. So it's great to be back with everybody doing this webinar on a very important topic about how to recruit DEI resources and how to empower them for success. This is really a pertinent topic right now as the DEI business is booming across Europe. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, then I regularly look at a few job sites looking for different things going on, and the number of sites that I'm seeing posting DEI opportunities, particularly in-house ones, is just risen exponentially in the past few months. Also, as a consultant, I often get people asking questions about how to enter into the field, and that has also risen exponentially. Number of people who are interested in this topic, who want to get involved, and in my opinion, it's a really great thing. It's great and also very important that we talk about the fact that for many, this will be the first foray into working in DEI. And also DEI work is unique in many ways. And that is why Sarah and I are having this conversation today and talking about the ins and outs to get to the heart of this issue of how you recruit and empower DEI teams. So thrilled to be joined by Sarah Cordivano, who is an expert in the field of DEI. And she has a focus on implementing successful DEI strategies and developing initiatives to create more inclusive workplaces. Sarah is a speaker on impactful and data-driven DEI and author of the insightful and relatable book, DEI, How to Succeed at an Impossible Job. So welcome, Sarah, or welcome back, now that we're in this new live stream. Thanks for hanging on.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you. And to get us started, let's talk about your book, if you don't mind answering this question again. Why did you write it?
Yeah, so in the past few years, I saw a lot of companies in Europe hire their first DEI role. And I actually saw a lot of good intentions all around. So, companies had big ambitions on how they wanted the impact they wanted to see from this role. And the people who were hired for these roles also were optimistic about the change that they could have. But unfortunately, I saw a lot of difficulty from both sides. So companies that were really ambitious, but they didn't really know what it takes to empower and prepare a DEI role for success. And then people who were stepping into these roles were really excited about the work they wanted to do, but they didn't really have the resources and support to bring those ambitions to life. So the concept behind the book is, I really wanted to give a step-by-step guide for someone who's taking on that first DEI role, to help them put the building blocks in place. So create their first strategy, set up a governance board or advisory board, collect data to measure whether or not their strategy is having impact, and then to put really impactful initiatives in place. So the book really takes you through those steps, and it's meant to be really easy to read, accessible, practical for anyone who finds themselves in their first DEI job.
And it really is all of those things. I really enjoyed getting into the book this summer, had a bit of time off, able to get through, and just enjoyed the style in which it's written. Very relatable, very practical as well. I think it will be a real asset to people who are either looking for roles in this industry or looking to expand their teams, working in-house, for instance, in an organization, wanting to recruit people into these roles. And one thing that really strikes me about what you're saying is talking about really putting the building blocks in place, the foundation. And because I think for some people, they might think to recruit in people and then figure out what the right environment might be to enable them. But no, it starts with a lot of intentionality before that. Before you can recruit people in, you have to have the steps in place, as you're saying, to make sure that they have what they need. But if we cycle back perhaps to thinking about recruiting in DEI teams, if you're looking for a DEI manager, for instance, what sort of skills should people be looking for? Or if you want to become a DEI manager, what skills should you possess already, or should you be looking to develop in order to do well in this role?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think people coming from the ERG space have a certain notion or idea of what skills they need to succeed in DEI work. Often they think about taking that that mindset and that approach in grassroots ERG activism work and just transferring it to a corporate setting. But it's actually much more complicated than that. I would say the main skills to focus on are project management. So how to bring a project to life, to create transparency, to track the success of the project. The next, I would say, stakeholder management. Maybe this is even the most important. So working with stakeholders who have very different understanding of DEI, different needs, values, their own business goals, and figuring out the right way to work with those stakeholders and get them on board with the work you're doing, or maybe even do a bit of convincing. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes convincing. And then another skill would be around communication. So this could be communication through email or blog posts, or it could be having the ability to stand in front of a room of 100 people, maybe people who are more senior than you, and talk about DEI with confidence and in a way that you're resonating with them and they're hearing and listening to you. And then I'll mention one other, because you might have noticed I didn't say anything specific around expertise on specific DEI topics. I think what's even more important than that is the ability to research a problem, research a topic. So let's say your organization needs to figure out the best way to set up prayer rooms in the office. You need the ability to kind of find the right resources to figure out the right way to do this, not just going on your own assumptions or gut feeling about it, but really do the proper research to figure out what are the requirements of such a project, what does it take to put that in place, and that entire skill. I mean, it's a mixture of best practice knowledge, but also figuring out how to research topics that you don't have these skills on, and find the right resources, find the right the experts to talk to get the right information you need.
I think that's a really important point that you're making around the very definable skills that are required in order to succeed in this role. And I noticed that you mentioned that passion for DEI did not come on the list so far. I think that it is very important. Like it's great to have that, but it is not you have that and therefore you will succeed. There are very definable things that will actually enable you to do the work that is required to make the changes, make the progress that you want to see in the organization. And that's a really important message to share with our audience here. And thinking about lived experience, what are your views around whether having lived experience of marginalization, for instance, is prerequisite in order to be an effective DEI manager?
So I think any lived experience, having that ability to understand what it's like to be part of a marginalized group, I think it's helpful. It definitely gives you a sense of perspective that I think is very helpful. But I think it's also important to have a capacity for empathy, no matter who you are, to make sure when you're supporting as an ally or as in a DEI role to support a marginalized group, making sure that you're not centering yourself in that work and making sure you have the ability to empathize with the situation that your colleagues are in. I think it's really important. And I think the ability to kind of listen and learn and understand different situations and take that to heart is really important. But I also wouldn't say, being a part of a marginalized group is a ticket to fully understand DEI work. And I think that's actually a mistake that a lot of companies make, is they look around the company and they find someone, a person of color or a woman or a person who's queer, and they say, that's the person that should be heading our DEI work. And unfortunately, they are optimizing on their identity as opposed to the skills they bring to the work. And I think that can also be, really tricky for the people who are starting that role, because the colleagues have the assumption that they're ready to take this role on, but it really takes much more than just identity to succeed in this work, I think.
Fully agree. It does take a lot more than just identity to succeed in the work. And that leads very nicely into the next thing I wanted to ask you, really, about what is the cost of DEI?
Yeah, this is a good question. I mean, I think oftentimes when companies ask me, how much should our DEI budget be? How big should our DEI budget be? They're thinking very specifically around, a line item in a budget, but it's so much more complex than that. I think that there's a lot of costs of DEI that are actually much more, let's say, expensive than budget. So an organization willing to prioritize DEI alongside other business priorities, this might not have a specific line item in a budget, but it does have a cost because it means they're deprioritizing one topic in favor of DEI, or while they're making critical business decisions, they're thinking about DEI along the way, which might delay that business decision. It might add extra costs to it that aren't necessarily, DEI budget costs, but it definitely might mean that the organization needs to reshuffle its priorities. And also, another cost of DEI is really making sure that leaders are able to role model inclusive leadership, and they understand the language around DEI. They can talk about it with their peers. And again, this is something that might not have an obvious cost in a budget, but equipping leaders to be role models actually takes a lot of time and energy. And it means that you're shifting focus away from, maybe instead of working on one project, they're spending some time upskilling on DEI. And then lastly, I think one of the most expensive costs of DEI is making sure that the stakeholders throughout the organization that are critical to the success of DEI work, could be folks in HR, could be folks in communications or legal, they are empowered to support DEI work. So they actually recognize DEI work as part of their role, and they make the time to support your work. So I think this is often the thing that companies forget. They have the assumption that a single DEI role or a small DEI team can magically transform an entire company, but it really takes people throughout the entire organization to put their time into DEI work, to think about the DEI considerations of the projects that they're driving, in order for DEI to succeed in a company. And that really does have a cost. I mean, it does take their focus away from something else.
Yeah, definitely. The phrase "putting money where your mouth is" coming to mind. And as you said, it isn't all about money in terms of like euros, dollars, etc. But it really is that concept around, if DEI is a priority for you, if it's strategic for you, etc., then these are things that have to be put in place to enable that. Just thinking about one client that I had where I saw a best practice really around putting their money where their mouth was, is actually putting in DEI work for ERG leads, the employee resource group leads, in as part of their performance objectives for the year. And so they will be measured against that. It is actually part of their job role, so that there's time allotted in their daily working lives towards actually working on the ERG, looking forward to achieving their objectives, things like that. So it isn't just hoping for the best and giving people a title, it's really enabling that. And for the management to understand that because this ERG work is there, that means that other things might need to fall off the priority list or might need to be dealt with slightly differently, because this person can't do, you can't do absolutely everything. Things have to be prioritized in that way. So things like that really come to mind with what you're saying, for sure. And thinking about what are the basics to have in place before recruiting a DEI person, another story comes to mind from an ex-colleague, actually, who joined the organization we worked for. And for 2 weeks, she really came in and twiddled her thumbs because she didn't have a laptop. It took IT that long to actually enable her. So it was a case of just coming in, but not being able to do work. And of course, when we recruit in people doing DEI work or any work, and also when we're starting DEI jobs ourselves, we don't want to be in that position where we find that there is not that basic setup to enable us to actually do our jobs and be effective. So what, in your experience, Sarah, would you say are those basics that need to be in place before you recruit a person and before they start doing the work?
Yeah, a great question. And let me think about a little bit, like, why is it that so many companies are unprepared when they decide to make this first hire? So I have a theory about this. By the time a company makes the decision to hire their first DEI role, they've gone through so much internal discussion and pain and debate about, whether they should hire someone, where's the budget going to come from? And at the final decision of hiring someone, the mindset often is, well, finally, now the person is here to take care of everything, and we can step back and just, thank goodness they're here and we don't have to do anything else. And unfortunately, this situation causes a lot of frustration because you've got people who were recruited into this role, but then by the time they start, the organization is not really set up to deal with those difficult situations of like what it takes for that role to succeed. So the basics I would put in place, if I was talking to a company who's about to hire their first DEI role, the first one is understanding the why behind hiring the role. What are they trying to achieve? Why do they want to bring this role on? Is there a specific topic that they need to focus on? Are there systemic issues? What does success look like for them? So this is really important because it creates accountability in the organization to solve to answer some of those questions before bringing someone in. The next thing is the budget. I understand that it's not going to be perfect to have, every possible line item defined in advance, but at least to know that there's some budget set aside for DEI work, because I can't imagine anything more demoralizing than starting your first DEI role and realizing you have absolutely no budget and you have to sort of ask for every single expense and get it approved, which could really demotivate you. And the next, and I mentioned this earlier about the cost of success, is making sure that the stakeholders who are required to support your role are already aware of that obligation. That stakeholders know that they're going to be supporting your work. You have one-on-ones set up with them in the first few weeks, and they're sort of primed to work with you. And that really helps you because you know that you don't have to go through that extra step of convincing that person that they need to work with you. They're already expected to do that. And then lastly, making sure that senior leadership or the executive team is involved in this entire DEI strategy that you're working towards. So, making sure that you have someone in the senior team who can support your work or champion your work, making sure you have regular communication with that team so you get feedback from them, and you can also give feedback to them as well. And making sure that there's some buy-in from that senior leadership team.
And many of the things you're mentioning, I believe you can suss out during the interview if you are being recruited in for a DEI role, or even if you're in the organization already and you're being asked to transition into a DEI role. There are questions you can ask, things you can suss out to figure out, are there red flags, are there green flags, to know whether I want to work with this company and actually do the work that they've asked me to do. Just thinking from your experience, what are some other things, red flags, green flags, that people can use to really assess whether the opportunity is for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually spent some time in the last month or so thinking about this, and I wrote a very comprehensive blog post on this. So I'll give you some highlights now, but I'd encourage everyone to check out this blog post because I went through in very clear detail, like what kind of red flags you can look for and what questions you can ask to figure out whether an organization is really interested in seeing meaningful change, or if they just want fill a position to take some of the heat away from the, maybe whoever's dealing with these inquiries now, kind of shift that to somewhere else. So when I look at job postings, I'm looking for how the position is described, what responsibilities the role has. If I get the sense of it's more like a role that is organizing diversity day events and pride events, and I don't see any like strategic work, that's definitely a red flag for me. Also, when I look to find out more information about the reporting line, I think this is really helpful. So if I have that first interview or discussion with a company, I typically ask about the reporting line, because not only does it tell me, where I'm, who would be my manager, it gives me a sense of how important this organization sees DEI, whether they see it reporting directly into a leadership team or whether it's sort of buried in a mid-level HR team, perhaps reporting to someone who doesn't really have expertise on DEI and might not be able to open doors to decision makers who you need, to be on board with your DEI work in order for it to succeed. And then, of course, I always try to find out more information about the company. So I look at Glassdoor. I talk to friends who have worked or previously worked at the company, and I just ask them, what's the culture like? What's the management board like? How have they dealt with issues relating to DEI in the past? I might look at their corporate website to see whether or not they have a diverse leadership team, whether they've have meaningful DEI projects that they talk about, whether their CEO has made any blog posts or any communication around DEI in the past. So all of that gives me a little bit more insight on what the company's like. But if I'm talking about green flags, I'm looking at the job description to see explicitly that a budget is mentioned. I'm asking questions to the hiring manager to see if they already have a vision for what success looks like for this role. And I'm looking at the responsibilities. Like, is there a list of reasonable responsibilities in the job description that I think that one person they're hiring could actually accomplish? So often I see a list of responsibilities that a team of 5 people couldn't achieve, and that definitely gives me some concern. And I always ask about a sponsor. Is there someone on that leadership team who is willing to put their visibility and their voice out for DEI work? And if they haven't found that person yet, it's okay, but are they willing to find that person? Is somebody on the management board willing to partner with you and support your success?
Totally agree. And just thinking about some of my experience working as a consultant in D&I, sometimes talking with clients about job descriptions, and it can come across more as a wish list rather than something that's actually reasonable and achievable, as you're saying, by one person, or the number of resources they're looking for or they're expecting to actually get it done. I think those are certain things that don't create the right environment for success and also can actually hinder development. You could have people working, but if there's just too much, if the expectations are not actually commensurate with what is achievable or what is needed, then success is going to be rather unlikely, unfortunately. So really important to think about. Just thinking to those of you who are tuned in, if you have any questions, comments, please go ahead and insert them. We'd love to hear from you and to answer some of them while we're still live on air. And thinking about the work you've done yourself, Sarah, and continue to do in this area, what are some things perhaps that you wish you'd known before getting started?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a few of my learnings, some of which were quite painful along the way, but I can also suggest checking out my book, because there's a whole chapter at the end called The Job and You, which really helps you think about what your role is in relationship to this work and how to manage that relationship and make sure you're avoiding burnout, make sure you're, supporting yourself. So a lot of my learnings I've sort of baked into that chapter. But I'll give you a few things. So the first is to really manage your expectations. Like, I think oftentimes we're very idealistic when we start a DEI role, but it's very difficult for corporations to move quickly. It's very difficult for them to put an ambitious DEI strategy and see impact right away. So sometimes it can take you to kind of look at a longer timeline for implementing a DEI strategy, so you have more time to put the work in place. And on top of that, just being flexible. Like, instead of, in my mind, having a very specific solution or project already planned out, really trying to get to know your organization and trying to understand, what is the solution they need based on their situation, their challenges. Maybe it's about developing something that really meets those specific needs, as opposed to something that's kind of already designed in your mind. And then lastly, I would say, remembering to keep this all in perspective. And this is a job, and what is a job? It's a financial transaction where you're paid for your time and expertise and energy. And I mean, it can feel a bit awkward to think about DEI work that way, because we are so emotionally invested in this work. But ultimately, it's still a job that you're paid for. And it's really important that you value your time and your energy. And importantly, that, you're not putting yourself in a position where you're exploiting yourself, or you are, overworking yourself because you are so passionate about this work. So having that distance and that realistic view of the work itself. Yeah. And Tamara, maybe I can ask you, what do you wish you'd known before doing this work?
Ooh, that's a good question. Many things that you mentioned, Sarah, really resonate with me, for sure. Things you've learned along the way. And one thing that really stood out to me that I'm very aware of now that I wasn't as aware of before, that I've sort of learned on the job, as it were, is not to be distracted by action. For instance, you mentioned earlier about the party planner role, the job description, and it's all about International Women's Day is coming up. Ooh, now it's Black History Month. Now it's this, now it's this. And so it can seem like there's a lot going on. There's a lot of momentum. But when you actually get down to it and the dust starts to settle, you think, what is actually being achieved? When are we actually hearing about the impact that's being created? Or is it all just having parties and yay, balloons, streamers, but nothing's actually changing? We're not getting to the heart of any issues. So that's definitely a key learning that I've had in my time so far working with DEI, just not being distracted by all of that and actually looking at what the impact is and prioritizing impact over intention, being very clear about that and holding ourselves to account in order to achieve the results that we actually want to. And also thinking back to many of the points you raised earlier while talking about how to recruit people in the work that needs to be done before, a great thing coming to my mind was around clarity, the need to grapple with these things, to ask these questions and make sure that certain things are defined and understood in order to create those conditions for success. So making sure there is that level of clarity and that you're prepared to really take a good look at yourself as an organization, for instance, and understand what the context truly is and what work needs to be done in order to achieve what you want to achieve. Just some things that, yeah, in my experience, I picked up along the way, shall we say.
Yeah, I can relate to all of those.
I can imagine, definitely. I can imagine. And looping back perhaps to the internal structure that will enable people doing DEI work, what do you say are good things and bad things about reporting structure? Some do's and don'ts about how to position DEI managers, for instance, within the reporting structure.
Yeah, so oftentimes I see companies who hire their first DEI role, they don't really have the confidence yet, that they don't really understand what kind of role, what the DEI role will look like, what kind of power it needs to have. So they sort of position it as like a mid-level HR manager role. So you might report to like a head of leadership and development or a head of, employer branding or talent or something like this. And unfortunately, oftentimes when that happens, you don't really have visibility with leadership. And even worse, sometimes, that manager that you're reporting to has their own agenda and they don't really want to, give you visibility. They don't really want to elevate the topic of DEI beyond their other priorities. And this can be really unfortunate because in order to see really impactful change in DEI work, you really need some visibility with leadership. You really need to be invited to have conversations with VPs. You really need to be able to build that trustful relationship with those people because they're exactly the people you need to, understand the why behind doing DEI work, understand what their role is. And if you don't have that level of communication with them, they're going to exclude you from any decision making that actually directly impacts your work. And this is so unfortunate. Like, if you want to talk about how this goes wrong, I've seen companies who have had layoffs or have been planning layoffs, and they don't even include their DEI managers in the decisions or in the discussions around layoffs. They're the last team to know. And you can avoid so much damage by involving your DEI team in some of those early conversations, even though they are quite sensitive and it requires, a high level of privacy. But you see companies that are just so afraid of bringing DEI into that conversation to have them have a seat at the table. So if I think like, what does it look like when it works well? I would say having your DEI team report into someone in the C-suite. So, chief HR officer or a chief strategy officer, something like that. Or even if that's not if you're not reporting directly into the senior leadership, having a leader who is visible and influential, maybe, someone who's personally passionate about this work and who can remove roadblocks for you. So reporting into that person is still a better option than a mid-level HR manager, because that person can open doors for you and they can get you a seat at the table when these important things are discussed.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And looking at the time, unfortunately, we are coming towards the end of our session now. And we haven't got any questions in so far, but keep them coming. We might still have time to answer one or two if they come through. But I really want to thank you, Sarah, for joining me this afternoon and for sharing these wonderful insights about recruiting and empowering DEI professionals within organizations. And wanted to ask, perhaps it's my final question. So I'm aware that you are writing your second book at the moment. Any spoilers or insights about what we can expect from it?
So, my background before I transitioned into DEI work was in data analysis, data visualization. So I still hold that topic quite close to my heart. And I think about how we can improve the DEI work we do with data. So that is something I'm thinking about quite intensely at the moment. And I hope I can create a very practical guide that helps people think about the intersection of data and DEI.
Well, that sounds super interesting, and I look forward to hearing more about that when it comes out. And in the meantime, you can see on the screen there the links on Amazon to find Sarah's book, which is out already. Got it here. DEI, How to Succeed at an Impossible Job. Definitely, as I said earlier, very relatable, very readable, really clear thinking about how to prepare both as somebody is in an organization, preparing for recruiting in people, but also if you're thinking about starting DEI work, how to prepare yourself for that role or further your work in that position. So there are links about how to find it. So thank you very much for joining us and for soldiering through despite the technical glitches. Thank you for that. And thank you very much for Sarah for this great conversation. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you. And I look forward to reading your next book when it comes out, and as well going on Medium and seeing all of your insights there.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great to be here. And yeah, please find me on Medium. I post a lot of blogs around, working in DEI, finding a job in DEI. So there's definitely lots of stuff there that you can find. And of course, it's all free. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. So connect with me on LinkedIn if you read the book or if you purchased it. Let me know what you think about it. I love to talk to you about that as well. So look forward to talking to you in the future. And thank you for having me on this stream. It was really great.
Well, very happy to. Thank you for coming. And speaking of LinkedIn, if you're very passionate about inclusion, then my monthly newsletter is now being published there. So please feel free to sign up. It's called Kazuri's Inclusion Insights. Once a month, you get a digestible dose of insights about inclusion to help you power your journey around DEI. And also, if you would like to sign up for it into your inbox, then go to my website, kazuriconsulting.com, and you can sign up there and also read blog posts on different topics around inclusion. So that is all from us for now. Thank you very much for joining, and see you next time.